Watership Down podcast is intended for listeners who are familiar with the plot. There will be spoilers. This episode is recorded, edited and narrated by Newell Fisher. It is scripted by Newell Fisher and Erik Steps. Hello, and welcome to the Watership Down podcast episode 131, in which we will be looking at Season 1, Episode 9 of the TV series and Episode 9 of the series overall, The Vision. The appeal for the Rabbit Welfare Association and Fund is ongoing. Details in the notes, please give what you can. And I'm still showcasing Watership Down themed art. Again, details in the notes. Please let me know if you would like your Watership Down themed art to appear as the podcast title image for an episode with full credit given. So, before we get back to Watership Down, let's revisit the journey to it from Sandalford. Erik Steps' Visit to England, Part 3. Day 3, Part 2. The Road, Newtown Churchyard and the Warren of the Snares. Quote, a short drive took us along A339 to the small community of Newtown. Here we just wanted to see the church and the road. The latter is a well-known scene in the book because here the rabbits first come into contact with something man-made and we learn the funny term hoodoo. Adams devotes only 2 sentences to the church in the book. In the film, the rabbits meet the rats here in a small outbuilding. Nevertheless, the church is probably the most imposing building described in the whole novel. Therefore, a visit was indispensable. The name of the church is Church of St. Mary the Virgin with St. John. Unfortunately, the road here is extremely narrow, so there is no direct possibility to park in front of the church. Fortunately, right at the end of the village, a small path led to a driveway where there was a parking possibility in a small hollow. The walk to the church was then about 200 metres. The church itself was not open, but the cemetery area which the rabbits crossed was accessible. And on the other side, the famous road could be reached where the rabbits first met the hoodoos. I'm afraid that nowadays the rabbits would have little chance to cross the road. There are many cars driving and very fast. This already concluded our visit to Newtown. The next destination was the one I was most afraid of getting to, the Warren of the Snares, or Cowslip's Warren. The first problem was to find a parking place nearby. Fortunately, there was a possibility in the Ox Drove, a narrow forest road, which I had already found via Google Maps. This was only a short drive along Wells Street. For our parking option in the Ox Drove, it was then a 10-minute walk through a nice little wood with some houses to the entrance that would lead us to the Warren of the Snares. This was on the other side of a road behind a gate, which had a warning about private property, but was fortunately open. We took the risk and followed the road until we came to a field from where we could see the place called Frith's Copse in the book, and where our heroes meet Fat Cowslip for the first time. The place was fenced and probably now served as a paddock. We followed this fence and thus came to a place that would lead us directly to the Warren of the Snares. In the book and film, the two places differ somewhat. However, a hedge full of thistles and other undergrowth on the path looked exactly like the place where Bigwig gets caught in the snare in the book. In fact, there was not much missing to the idea that a farmer could well set up snares here. We followed the path further along the edge of a forest until we reached the place where, according to the book, the Warren of the Snares should be, and again we discovered some brown hares. So this area is filled with lapine life. We went a bit further into the forest, and here we made a really somewhat uncomfortable discovery. A piece of the forest was completely fenced. However, in some places gaps had been left in the fence with devices that looked like they were used to catch animals. I can certainly imagine that one could use them to catch a rabbit. So in the place where man has already messed up the rabbits' lives with snares, has he found a new perfidious way to make their lives miserable? The discovery here of all places was very interesting. Then it was time to head back. At the fence I read another passage. For the Warren of the Snares, only Silverweed's eerie poem came into question. The way back, however, turned out to be a little bit more difficult because we wanted to leave this area via another path, since it led back to the road faster. Here, however, the gate was blocked off and covered with barbed wire. It took some effort to overcome this obstacle. With this, however, the second day trip was done and could be considered a complete success. We were able to visit all the places described in the book in this area, even if crossing private land was sometimes necessary. End quote. Thank you, Erik. Next week, Erik visits Ephrafa and the River Test. Anyway, let's get back to Watership Down. Season 1, Episode 9, The Vision. The 9th episode of the Watership Down TV series was first broadcast in the UK on the 23rd of November 1999. It was written by Mary Crawford and Alan Templeton. There will be a link to the full episode on YouTube in the notes. In the 1978 film, bearing in mind the events of last week's episode, this is the point at which, having arrived back on Watership Down after an uneventful journey back from Ephrata, the Ephratan attack on Watership Down itself should be starting. But not here. In fact, we will not hear from Ephrata again for 4 episodes. And when we do, in one of my favourite episodes of this TV series, it will be very different from the original story. We open on a river near Watership Down that seems to be nearer to it than the Test into which General Windward fell last week. 2 swans are seen. Suddenly they are being harassed at their nest by a character we haven't seen since episode 2, the oversized, sarcastic weasel who was lured into a mysterious tunnel in the new warren on the Down by Hannah the Mouse and trapped there. So obviously the tunnel he was trapped in came out somewhere quite far away. He tells the swans they are lucky he has more important prey to focus on. The long ears. We see Watership Down in the distance. On the Down, life seems chilled. Hawkbit and Pipkin are playing. Primrose, however, sits looking into the distance. Hazel and Fiver approach her, and she tells them she has been thinking about her original warren, Redstone, where she was captured by a raiding party led by Vervain of Ephrata. Redstone is this series' version of Nutley Copse from the novel, it seems. Hazel, newly united with his love, hesitantly asks if she is happy on Watership Down. She says she is very much, but she held on to the dream of returning to Redstone one day while she was imprisoned in Ephrata. She would like to see it again. Fiver prompts her as to where she regards as being home. Hazel, when she cannot answer if she might want to stay there, offers to take her back, to her surprise. At this point, Fiver has a rhyming vision that basically says Redstone has been abandoned in fairly stark terms. Primrose is outraged and leaves them, despite Fiver apologising. Hazel points out that the thought of seeing Redstone again was all that kept her going in Ephrata. Fiver hopes his vision was wrong. Hazel says there is only one way to find out. And so, Hazel and Primrose set off for Redstone Warren, Keehar commenting on their journey of love, Fiver more worried about what they will find at the end of it. The life of leisure on Watership Down continues, with only Blackberry pointing out that they need fresh straw for bedding, interrupting Bigwig's napping. When Bigwig asks her if she has ever tempted to have a day doing nothing, she jokes that it is Hazel who keeps them running. Fiver and Pipkin are playing, when suddenly Fiver has another vision, this time very powerful. As the others surround him, he loudly predicts the return of the weasel they fought in the spring, intent on revenge. We see the weasel chase a squirrel up a tree close to Watership Down. Hazel and Primrose have reached a canal with high brick sides. The actual closest canal to Watership Down is the Kennet and Avon Canal, which passes through the centre of Newbury, more than a mile north of Sandalford. However, in this fictionalised geography, there is one relatively close to Watership Down, though which direction Redstone is from the Down is unclear. Hazel uses the obstacle of the canal to ask Primrose if she is sure she wants to return to Redstone. Isn't it better to live for the future? She rebukes him, saying she lived without a future in Ephrata, and now he wants her to forget her past. She will find Redstone with or without him. Back on the Down, Keehar is ordered to scout for the weasel from the air by Bigwig, who also tells Pipkin to warn the local wildlife to either leave or keep far underground. Bigwig is also having the warren adapted for defence, with side entrances being blocked. A tired Dandelion complains to Blackavar that Hazel at least manages to be polite when ordering them about. Underground, more defensive work is underway, and Hawkbit complains that he needs a rest. Bigwig appears and subjects him to more of his harsh tones. He is no diplomat, and not even Blackberry is pointing out how hard Hawkbit has worked to moderate his attitude. Once Bigwig has gone, Hawkbit complains that he can't wait for Hazel to return. He then turns on Fiver, saying that if he didn't have all his visions, they wouldn't have all this trouble. He calls Fiver a curse on the warren. Fiver looks utterly crestfallen. Back at the canal, We encounter another example of this strange hybrid British and North American world, as Hazel and Primrose take cover as a horse passes towing a barge, a practice that ceased as an actual method of moving goods in Britain in the mid-20th century, and, as far as I know, was never used in the US or Canada. You would only see it here now in a museum setting or as part of an expensive hobby. Primrose points out that the barge could be used as a stepping stone to get over the canal. Before Hazel can object, she is on the barge. He joins her, but as they leap off onto the far bank, she doesn't quite make it and falls into the canal. The sides are too high for her to climb out, and all Hazel can do is run along the bank, trying to encourage her to stay afloat as she is swept along. Swept along? In a canal? One of the whole points of a canal is that they do not flow like a river. I admit I nearly missed this error. Back at the down, Kihar is harassing the weasel, having spotted it from the air, but his progress continues nevertheless. On the down, Blackavar and Dandelion are finished above ground. Bigwig, after a brief compliment, orders them to help underground. Pipkin arrives and reports that he has warned the local wildlife about the weasel. However, 2 hedgehogs have come back with him, afraid to be on their own. Bigwig welcomes them. This foreshadows an aspect of this series that marks it out as being aimed at children, as the cooperation of other wildlife with the rabbits on Watership Down becomes far more Disney-like in character, and any pretence that this story is set in our natural world is abandoned. Interestingly, Holly now passes Bigwig taking food underground, though, like Blackavar, he now seems to be silent. Bigwig interrupts Blackberry and Hawkbit trying to have a rest. Hawkbit points out their work underground is done. He adds that Bigwig could learn some lessons from Hazel in pleasant leadership. Bigwig replies that he is not trying to win a popularity contest. He asks where Fiver is. Blackberry says he has gone off to eat and isn't back yet. Bigwig sighs that he had better go and find him. He tells them to go and find something to do. Hawkbit complains he can't wait for the weasel to show up. At least it will distract Bigwig. Back at the canal, Primrose is tiring in the water. Hazel shouts from the bank that he wants them to be together forever and to have as many children as Ella are. They are approaching a lock, and Hazel sees a barge approaching from behind them. As it passes Primrose, she struggles to stay afloat and out of its way. In panic, Hazel jumps in after her, preventing Primrose from going under. A man operates the lock gate, and they are both swept through. On the other side, the bank is a lot lower, and they are at last able to climb out onto the bank. Now then, while the bank being lower on the other side of the lock might make sense, what on earth would be the point of a canal lock with one gate? The whole point is to have 2 gates so you can move a barge between 2 stretches of the canal that are at different levels, which is exactly why they do not flow. And how exactly was the canal flowing with the lock gate closed ahead of it? Anyway, enough of this canal-based pedantry. They are safe. Bigwig is looking for Fiver. He finds him hiding under a group of boulders that foreshadow Redstone Warren. Interestingly, such sandstone boulders are not unknown on Downland. In fact, they are found in abundance on parts of the Wiltshire Downs that lie to the west of Watership Down and were deposited on the chalk at the end of the last ice age, the largest stones of Stonehenge being made from them during the Bronze Age. But they are not found on the Hampshire Downs, at least in our reality. Fiver is now convinced after Hawkbit's rebuke that his visions do not predict the future, they actually bring it about. Bigwig jokes about the idea of Hawkbit being right about something, but Fiver is inconsolable. He now thinks he might have caused the destruction of Sandalford. Kihar arrives to warn Bigwig that the weasel is close, and Bigwig tells him to stay with Fiver. The sun has set. Bigwig arrives back at the warren and tells Hawkbit they are going to have words when all this is over, but there is no time now. Back at the canal, Hazel and Primrose are asleep after their escape from the water. He wakes and tells her they need to move as the owls are hunting. When she remarks on how he saved her, he says he loves her, then asks if he said that out loud. At the sound of an owl close by, they run under cover. And now follows what can only be described as a music video, lasting 1.5 minutes, as we hear Cerys Matthews sing her lovely song Thank You Stars, accompanied by a collection of images of Hazel and Primrose from the series. I will not detail these here, but interestingly they do include scenes from episodes we have not yet seen set in the middle of winter, and it is quite sweet. As the sequence ends on a lyric about the way back home, we briefly see them arrive at Redstone Warren. In a complete change of tone, back on Watership Down, the weasel arrives, sadistically saying it is time to feed. He enters the warren and stalks the runs, but quickly falls into a pit. Bigwig and Hawkbit try to cover him in earth, but he manages to clamber out. They run away past the two hedgehogs. However, the weasel stumbles and falls on them, crying out in pain. And now he is directly confronted by Hawkbit, Bigwig and Dandelion, who block the run. Above ground, we see the weasel chased out of the warren as, at last, he meets his match. Bigwig tells the weasel to go and find easier prey. The weasel says he will wait until they come above ground. Bigwig points out they have plenty of food underground, to which Hawkbit adds that the local wildlife has moved away. The weasel will starve if he stays close to Watership Down. The weasel slinks away. At Redstone Warren, under a full moon, a delighted Primrose approaches the main entrance, which lies by what looks like a dolmen, or the remnant of a Neolithic burial chamber, consisting of a large flat boulder balanced on supports. Again, this seems to be foreshadowing what she will find. As they enter the warren via a burrow entrance in a crack in a tall boulder next to the dolmen, the light-hearted music ends, and Hazel sees cobwebs waving in the breeze. Primrose is further inside, calling out the names of rabbits she knew there. As Hazel joins her, they realise the place is empty. There is only old scent. No rabbit has been here in seasons. Fiver was right. But then they hear a solitary voice, and Captain Broom appears, voiced ironically by Richard Briers, who of course voiced Fiver in the 1978 film. He is old, and has a white version of the beard design sported by Vervain, though no other similarities to him. He tells them there was a great sickness, and the black rabbit took everyone a few seasons ago, but then he greets several rabbits who aren't there. Prolonged solitude has got to him, it seems. A reminder that rabbits are social animals not adapted to living alone. The weasel, defeated, is searching for food. He sees the boulders Fiver is hiding under, and smells him. Kihar, waking just in time, tries to scare him off, but he reaches for Fiver between the boulders as Fiver withdraws further into them, kicking desperately at him. Back at Redstone, Primrose reflects sadly that all the time she dreamt of returning to Redstone while at Ephrafa, they were gone, with the black rabbit of inlay. Hazel says their spirits stayed waiting for her, but now it is time to set them free. She has him now, and Watership Down. And all her tomorrows, she adds tearfully, as, for some reason, a green full moon emerges from behind the clouds. Captain Broom arrives. Suddenly all his friends have gone and just said goodbye to him, so maybe it wasn't just his imagination. Hazel invites Captain Broom to join them on Watership Down, and, realising he can't stay there on his own, he gladly accepts. Primrose tells him Watership Down is the most beautiful place in the world. As they leave, she looks back at the empty Redstone Warren and says a sad goodbye to her friends, thanking them for waiting for her. At the boulders where Fiver is in peril, the weasel has nearly reached him and continues with its mockery of its prey. And then we hear Bigwig's voice. Backing out, it sees Blackavar, Bigwig, Holly and Dandelion descending upon it from the top of one of the boulders. Bigwig roars in anger. We do not see the outcome, but do learn that the rabbits of Watership Down are now able to fight a weasel en masse in the open. Back on Watership Down, Hawkbit is complaining about having to fill in a pit he has just dug, even though it was for the weasel. Hazel, Primrose and Broom arrive at the down after an apparently easy return journey, and Hawkbit welcomes Hazel back sincerely. He fills him in on what has happened with the weasel, adding that Fiver is in a bad state, and it's his fault. Primrose introduces Blackberry to Captain Broom, who pats her to see how solid she is. She looks confused. Primrose smiles. Fiver is still at his hiding place with his defenders. He is still saying he cannot live at Watership Down. Hazel arrives with Hawkbit and assures Fiver he is not causing the future, just predicting it. Some people just blame the messenger. Hawkbit looks ashamed. For proof, Hazel points out that Fiver was right about Redstone, but it had been long abandoned. He was not the cause of it. Fiver is convinced by Hazel, to Bigwig's slight irritation, as he has spent the night trying to convince him. Hazel wants to hear all about the weasel, and also has news of his own. He is going to be a father. The all-male group set off back to Watership Down in a flurry of the kind of comments that British men had been known to make to one another when hearing such news with no women present, though just about suitable for young ears. All is well again on Watership Down. Is it canon? This is the point at which the story told by the 1999 to 2001 TV series diverges decisively away from the original plot, though there will still be elements of the original story that make an appearance, but from now on they will be increasingly rare. Which is not to say there will not be some good storytelling along the way. The annoying use of sarcastic predators continues, where in the novel this seemingly only applied to cats. The appearance of Redstone Warren goes some way to a legitimate expansion of the original story, as it is the first portrayal of a Warren raided by Efrafa, albeit that the original Warren, where Blackavar began his life, was called Nutley Copse, a real location about 2 miles northeast of the site of Efrafa. Overall, though, not canon. Next time, another raid on Nothanger Farm, which echoes another tale of El-Ra, or El-Akhera as he should be called, the telling of which is very much canon.